Hi, and welcome to CPO Talks, the podcast that might just make you a chief procurement officer, or at least make you sound like one at your next meeting. Either way, it's packed with so much valuable insights that you're definitely in the right place. I'm Leo, and I'm thrilled you've joined us for this cybersecurity episode, Part 2.
So the last thing you were saying in part 1 was that your bet is that cyber standards is definitely the trend line. So now, building on that, and coming back to your second best friend, when and how do you formalize this? Are there critical clauses that need to be there and so on?
Don't know them by heart, but can cite some for sure. Liability, notification, audit, insurance, sub-tiers management, etc. Regarding breach notification, we would typically ask within 24 hours, which is often pushed back hard by the supplier's legal team, calling it impossible, blah, blah, blah. But look, when we work within the EU, we have a 72-hour obligation to notify the regulators if GDPR data are at stake, and we need time to investigate on our side before that clock runs out. So they should act like a partner in meeting our compliance duty. This is the kind of tone I'd rather use in case of blockage at senior level by framing it as a shared responsibility, not a punishment. I won't give up publicly my red line, but we might concede a window if in return we'll have a stronger commitment on their remediation timeline post-incident.
Negotiation.
Yeah, it's a trade-off idea. Other key clauses are about the rights to audit, and of course, the big one is liability and indemnification.
So let us know how you handle the liability cap and maybe their insurance requirements yourself?
Okay, so I'll not leak anything confidential, saying that very, very, very few players in my industry will accept unlimited liability. So requiring cybersecurity insurance becomes a tool. It provides a funded, structured way to allocate risk. We specify the required coverage amount based on our risk segmentation analysis we spoke about earlier. For a low-risk supplier, maybe $500,000 is sufficient, but for a high-risk partner, we could be around 50 to 150 millions.
Euros?
USD. Of course, don't forget to ask for the policy certificate annually as proof. We also look at the third-party coverage, which is what protects us from their partners' failures, for examples. We'll check that key sublimits are adequate, covering things like regulatory fines, incident response costs, and business interruption. Depending on your applicable law, you might be able to cover indirect losses or damages.
What's your tip here?
Values aside, if they resist providing transparency, it's a major red flag.
Okay, any other important points?
Final key clause, flow-down provisions. The contract must require your Tier 1 supplier to enforce similar or appropriate security standards on any of their own subcontractors who will handle your data or be involved in providing the service to you. Regulations like Part DS actually mandate this, by the way. You can't contract directly with your Tier 2s, but you can and must obligate your Tier 1 to manage that risk down the chain. Without this, you have a massive blind spot.
All right, so strong and well-negotiated contracts are the backbone of long-term security. And the reason we need to do all this becomes crystal clear when we start to talk about the real cost of getting it wrong.
Just let me connect the dots here. The cost of a breach is a multifaceted and often underestimated figure. The initial ransom payment, if a company chooses to pay it, is frequently just the tip of the iceberg.
What does it look like empirically?
In fact, there's a lot more, and the bigger one is operational downtime. We've talked about the chaos at some plants, and the specter of a plant shutdown is the biggest operational fear. It's not just a financial cost, it can be a company closure event, and, when in charge, a career-defining or career-ending event as well at the individual level.
I guess business interruption costs are often the largest component. We saw another stark example with the Colonial Pipeline attack in the US in 2021. The pipeline's operational technology wasn't directly hit, but the company shut down the entire 5,500-mile fuel pipeline as a precaution because they weren't sure. The result was a physical supply chain crisis. There were massive fuel shortages and panic buying across the East Coast. That's a direct line from a single compromised password to people not being able to fill up their cars.
The impact on critical infrastructure is frightening. And it's not just our own operations. If we fail to deliver components to our OEM customer, we can be liable for their downtime, which is a truly astronomical figure in the automotive industry. The contractual penalties can be severe.
And on top of customers, you can face regulatory fines as well. Under GDPR, a company can be fined 4% of its annual turnover for a serious breach. Similar laws exist in California with the CCPA and in many other jurisdictions. These fines are designed to be painful and to force companies to take cybersecurity seriously.
And the fines assume the breach becomes public, which brings up the reputational damage. We work so hard to build a brand that stands for quality, innovation, and reliability. A major data breach, especially one where customer data or sensitive intellectual property is lost, can shatter that trust overnight. Our customers are putting immense pressure on us to demonstrate robust cybersecurity. If we have a breach, we don't just risk a fine, we risk being deselected from future programs. We risk losing our status as a trusted partner. That long-term commercial impact is terrifying.
The reputational damage and loss of customer trust is arguably the most significant long-term cost. On top, you can see your stock price plummet once the first press articles are published, but also making it harder to attract and retain talent and give your competitors a powerful weapon to use against you. And you mentioned the loss of intellectual property. For a technology company, whether in aerospace or automotive, your IP is your crown jewel. If your designs for a next-generation battery system or a new lightweight material are stolen in a breach like SolarWinds, the long-term strategic damage is incalculable. You've lost your competitive edge, and that can impact your company's trajectory for a decade. So when you sum it all up, the response costs, the operational downtime, the regulatory fines, the reputational damage, and the loss of IP, the business case for investing in supply chain cybersecurity becomes overwhelmingly clear.
Yeah, it shifts the perspective. It's not just a cost center, it's an investment in business resilience and survival. The budget I might need for an extra person on my team to focus on this, or for the tools to manage supplier risk, seems trivial compared to the potential downside. This leads to my final thoughts. We can have the best processes, questionnaires, certifications, and clauses, but security is also about people and culture. How do we move this from a compliance exercise, I call it checkbox approach, to building a truly resilient culture of cybersecurity inside the company, and that extends into our supply chain?
I guess your ultimate goal is the most difficult to achieve. A compliance-based approach is brittle. Building that culture can start at home, in our own procurement organizations. Rangers lead the way. I'd suggest as a first step, internal training and awareness. Procurement teams need to be trained on the basics of cyber risks. They don't need to be security experts, but they need to know what questions to ask. They need to understand what ISO 27001 means and why it matters. They need to be able to have an intelligent first-level conversation with a potential supplier about their security posture. This training gives them the confidence and the vocabulary to make security part of their standard supplier conversations, right alongside price, quality, and delivery.
I completely agree. Now, what would you do to get a team who are already stretched thin negotiating prices and managing shortages to take on this new responsibility? How would you get a commodity manager of raw materials to start asking a steel supplier about their cyber attack response policy? It feels like a big change in the mindset, you see.
You could integrate it into the processes and tools they already use, making it part of the routine. The most effective way to do this is to build cybersecurity metrics into your SRM. When you have your quarterly review with a strategic supplier, you should have a security scorecard right next to the quality and on-time delivery metrics. The scorecard could include things like maintained certifications, e.g. TSACs, Part IS compliance, results of their latest pen test, annual security self-assessment, how many critical vulnerabilities have been identified, and what is the status of their remediation, etc. By discussing security in those quarterlies, for instance, you normalize the conversation. It sends a clear message that you view security as a core component of supplier performance, not an optional extra. It moves from a one-time check at onboarding to a continuous dialogue.
Making it part of the scorecard is very concrete. It's a language both we and our suppliers already understand.
The next level is to foster genuine collaboration. Instead of just being an auditor, be a partner. You could host a supplier security day where you invite your key partners and have your CIO present on emerging threats and best practices. You could share anonymized threat intelligence that might be relevant to them. For your most critical partners, you might even conduct joint incident response exercises. Run a tabletop simulation. A new zero-day vulnerability has been announced that affects a piece of software we both use. What is our joint plan to assess our exposure and patch our systems within the next 24 hours?
That builds serious muscle memory, like in the gym.
For sure, it's a drill. And it strengthens the relationship. So when a real incident occurs, you're not exchanging business cards for the first time.
A joint simulation is a really advanced concept, but for the top 5 most critical suppliers, I see the immense value. It builds a shared sense of responsibility. We're in this together.
That comes back to the idea that resilient supply chain culture is about fostering that sense of a shared fate. Your security depends on your supplier's security, and their business depends on yours. It's about moving beyond a transactional, compliance-driven relationship to collaborative risk management. It's a long journey, but it starts by embedding security into the daily cadence of procurement, through training, through your SRM scorecards, and through open, continuous dialogue.
All right, Mathilde, I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up. If I were to summarize the key takeaways for our listeners, I think it comes down to a few core principles. First, and most importantly, is the acceptance that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT issue. As procurement and supply chain professionals, we are the architects and gatekeepers of our extended enterprise, and this is now a core part of our responsibility. Second, the threat is real, the vectors are diverse, and as the attacks show, the cost of failure is immense. We simply cannot afford to be complacent. Third, the path forward is through a practical, risk-based approach. You don't have to fix everything at once. Start by mapping your suppliers, identifying those that pose the highest risk based on the data they handle, their integration with your systems, and their operational criticality. Focus your efforts there first. Fourth, use the powerful tools at your disposal. This means a robust process, well-negotiated contracts that clearly define responsibilities, liabilities, and insurance requirements. We must also leverage and enforce the growing number of mandatory industry and regulatory standards. They provide the benchmarks we need. And finally, this is ultimately about building a culture of cybersecurity. It's about training our own teams, integrating it into our supplier performance management routines, and fostering a collaborative partnership with our suppliers. It's about working together to build a more resilient ecosystem for everyone.
Thank you, Leo. And thank you for joining us for this CPO Talks Purchasing Point episode. If you want to suggest us a topic or ask us a question about the topic we discussed today, don't be shy and send us your question on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Patreon, or X, or directly in the comment section below this Spotify podcast or video format on YouTube. If you just type CPO Talks in your favorite social network or search engine, you'll find us. We'll be answering all of your questions related to cybersecurity by next week in a dedicated episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to like it or leave a comment, as it's our most precious feedback. You can also follow or subscribe to be aware when the next episode will be published. And finally, you can share this content to your best purchasing buddy.
Bye-bye. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the issues that matter the most to you. Until then, stay curious and, of course, stay cyber secure. Ciao!